probably wondering what all this stuff's for. Well, that makes two of us. I just brought it up here just to get you thinking. Well, it is so good to see you. I missed you all last week. I got up here to see the 12 to 15 inches of snow that Cuyahoga Falls got. And, I don't like to shovel snow, but I got to, just like all you got to last week. But it is great to see you all here. And thanks, Drew. Don't drop it. Good job. So let's kind of review. Since we weren't here last week, let's kind of review where we're at. So not 3 weeks ago, we were introduced to a character by the name of Nicodemus, and we kind of dipped into this conversation that he had with Jesus. And Nicodemus was asking about the kingdom of heaven and how to see it, how to enter it. And Jesus says to see or to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus says, how can I be born again? But what he found out is that you had to be born of physical birth as well as a spiritual birth. And Nicodemus believed that bright light of truth that Jesus brought into his life. Nicodemus believed it and changed his life radically. 2 weeks ago, last time we were together, we took a look at this guy called the rich young ruler. And this rich young man and this bright light of truth that Jesus brought into his life said, sell everything you have, give to the poor, come follow me. And this bright life, this young man, this young rich man, he could not do it. And what he found out was that his stuff, that his wealth controlled him, that he was more in love with that than he could ever possibly be in love with Jesus. And we've all had these defining moments in our life. We've all had them somewhere along the line. And even though this truth comes into our life, we still have this tendency from time to time to kind of run from the truth, to push back, to go back into the darkness and kind of ignore it. If I ignore this truth long enough, yeah, I see the red flags, but if I ignore it long enough, maybe it'll just go away. But we see that Jesus came to earth to define and maybe even redefine who God is and the way that God acts. And when that bright light of truth is shown upon us, it's shined right there, and we're in the middle of that bright light. If we stay there, if we abide, if we stand firm, if we remain in that bright light of truth, it has the potential to significantly change our life. And we struggle with that. We struggle with it today. They struggled with it back then. Even though we know what Jesus told us, and Jesus told us that you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So this morning we're going to dig into another story. And we live in a world, though, but we live in this world of such great technology. It's amazing technology we have today. Be able to explain almost anything that happens. It's amazing to me. They can take this little tube and they can stick it into your wrist, and they run this line all the way up into your heart. And they look around in your heart and they say, hey, that part looks good, that part doesn't look so good. And if it doesn't look so good, they run this other tube up there with this thing called a stent. You ever hear of that? You've heard of this stuff, right? You know this, right? The stent that goes in there, and then they stick another thing they call a balloon, and I don't know how this works. I guess the nurse is in the room, and she blows this balloon up or something. And all of a sudden, this stent pushes out, opens up that blood vessel, and your heart's working the way it's supposed to work. Isn't that fascinating to you? That's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me that you can get this little tube sent to you in the mail, and you can put some of your saliva in there, and then you mail it off to this lab somewhere, and the lab sends you a report and tells you your ancestral background. Isn't that amazing? That's just amazing to me. Pretty good accuracy. And we have all these technologies, those and so many more. And those technologies, though, has led us to buy into a concept. And here's the concept. I have to understand everything before I believe in something. Modern technology has been able to explain so much about our physical beings, about our body, about how the world works. And if I can't understand it and I can't explain it, I'm not going to believe it. And we've bought into that concept. So today we're going to look at a story from John chapter 9 in the Bible. And in that story, we're going to see that it actually turns that belief on its head. And the belief that we'll encounter, it says you don't have to understand everything to believe in something. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to have all your questions answered. God, I have 24 questions. 12 of them are answered. I got 12 more that aren't answered. I don't understand these. And God, until you answer these, I'm not going to be able to believe in you. So if it remains unexplainable, if I don't understand everything, if I can't explain everything, I'm sorry, God, but you're out. I'm not going to be able to believe it. But today's story we're going to look at, and we're going to find out you don't have to understand everything to put your faith in God. You don't have to understand everything to put your faith in God. Is that better? Every time I hear me, P, that's better. But before we get to the story from the Bible, have you ever had one of those stories in your life that you did something or your friend did something or you're with your friends and you do something and you tell that story, you just laugh about it, and every time for like weeks on end, for days, for weeks, every time you run into that friend, you tell the story and you just laugh about that story, and then years later, maybe you're at a high school reunion and you say, hey, do you remember? And your friend finishes the story, and then you start to laugh about it because it's a story that you just have to tell to everybody because it's such a great story. I have some of those. I have one I remembered as I was thinking about this. When I was in high school, our band went to Allegheny, New York. And I played trumpet in band. I played in a concert band, the jazz band. And so we went to Allegheny, New York, and later on in the year, the band from Allegheny came to Cuyahoga Falls. And so we stayed with a family up there. And so my best friend, Mark, and interestingly, in high school, he dated a girl named Jan. So it was Mark and Jan and Mark and Jan. Kind of cool story, side note. But back to the story. So we're up in Allegheny, New York, and on the Saturday was kind of a free day, and you had two options of what you can do. You could either go snow tubing or go bowling. Well, we're in Allegheny, New York, the heart of snow country up there, right in the snow belt. So Mark and I decided that we would go snow tubing. But Mark's girlfriend decided that she wanted to go bowling. So guess what we did? Yeah, we went bowling. You can bowl anywhere. So we went bowling, and we kind of changed mid-drift, so our host family didn't really know that we had done that. You know, we lived by a philosophy, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. That was our philosophy back then. And so we went bowling, but now it was time to get back to the host home to get ready for the concert that night. And so Mark and I were stuck there, so we decided that we would start to walk and we would hitchhiking in an unknown territory. So we're hitchhiking, and a car stops, and Mark's in front of me. Mark runs up to the car, two-door car. He opens the door, lifts the back seat up, says, Mark, you get in the back. Well, Mark's my best friend. He would always be looking out for my best interest. As I dipped to get into that car, I came face to face with the biggest Doberman pinscher I ever seen in my life. Fluffy. I'm not sure. I don't remember the name. So what did I do? I'm thinking, I don't want to walk the rest of the way, so I'm riding in the back of this car with this Doberman pinscher, and I think I poked it in the eye one time trying to pet it. I'm thinking, this thing is going, I'm guarding my neck. I think if he bites anywhere, as long as it's not my neck, I have a chance to live. So we get out, the guy drops us off, we have to walk a little bit further, and Mark and I, we are just laughing. We're laughing, we still tell that story. The story we're going to talk about today is one of those kinds of stories. I imagine that after this happened, that the disciples were sitting around the campfire, and he said, can you believe Jesus did that? Wasn't that oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. Did you see what he did? And that's this kind of story. Now, this is one of my favorite stories of what Jesus does to heal somebody. It's a great story, especially if you're ever called upon to teach middle school or junior high boys. Pick this. They love this story. So we're going to go look at John chapter 9, and it's the story of when Jesus heals a man born blind from birth, like whatever title they might have in there. So we're going to look at this defining moment that this young man encounters with Jesus and see maybe how it can apply to us. And here's the thesis for this story. Even though some things are unexplainable, there are also some things that are undeniable. Even though I can't explain some things, there are some things that I can look at and say that is undeniably true. And I can at least believe in that. And when we focus solely on those things that are unexplainable and not look at the things that are undeniably true, it's going to be really hard to have an active faith in God. However, if we turn our focus to those things that are undeniably true, when we encounter things that are unexplainable, it won't shipwreck your faith. So John chapter 9, we'll start with verse 1. I've always found verse 1 is a good place to start, so we'll start there. It's talking about Jesus. As Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So here we are at the very beginning of the story, and we encounter one of these really weird beliefs that they had back in Jesus' time when Jesus was on the earth. And that really weird belief was that if you were born blind or born with some type of physical infirmity, that it was the result of somebody's sin. Either that person's sin, how that person sinned before they were born, I don't quite get, but they believed that. Or the parents' sin. And so that physical ailment, that being born blind, was the result of somebody's sin. So his disciples asked Jesus, who was it, his or his parents? Verse 3, Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." So here comes Jesus bringing this bright light of truth, and he's bringing it right to his disciples. Let me tell you some truth here. Let me bring it before you. And Jesus says that about sin. It's not, Jesus says it's not about somebody's sin. This is so the works of God or the power of God can be displayed in this man. Nothing like that had ever been taught before. So it got their attention. So Jesus continues on in verse 4. Jesus says, "As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." So Jesus starts to explain to his disciples, and the disciples start to roll their eyes. Here he goes again. Guys, here we just asked about this blind guy, and he's talking about night and day, light of the world stuff. What is he even? That's not what we even asked. As Jesus so often does, he starts to reframe the question. So he's telling them, listen, while I'm here, it's day. And while I'm here, I got to do the work that the Father sent me for, because today is the day that I have to do it. I got to spread the light, and you need to pay attention, fellas. Fellas, you need to pay attention to what I'm doing, because someday I'm not going to be here. And it's going to be dark again. It's going to be night, and there's going to be confusion. So take some notes. Figure out exactly what I'm doing here, because you're going to have to be the ones that can continue this work and continue to bring light into the world, because I'm not always going to be here. Take some notes. And then he does something very interesting. He finishes his whole thing. He says, "I am the light of the world." I can only imagine the disciples sitting there and going, "You're the what?" Light of Jesus, there's 12 of us. We're in this little area of Palestine. This isn't even the world. Rome's the world, Jesus. You're the light of the... What do you mean you're the light of the world? Here he goes again, guys. What does he mean by this? But then in verse 6, Jesus does something really interesting to back up this claim that he's the light of the world. It says Jesus, after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam," the word which means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. That's weird. That's the part that the middle school and junior high boys love, that part, because then you get to start talking about that was one magic loogie. And they get real interested in that stuff. I don't know, boys are weird. Right? Isn't that weird? Why does Jesus do it that way? I don't know. Maybe he wanted a story. But now here's where the real fun begins. Verse 8. So the man, he goes, Jesus puts the mud spits. I don't know if you've ever tried to make enough mud to put in eyes, but that's a lot of saliva, right? It's not just a little. It's quite a bit. It's even more than you have to put in the little tube to find out about your ancestry. So he does that, washed. Blind man can see, verse 8. He heads home, and his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself said, I am the man. I'm the guy. He is radically changed, and an argument starts. That's him. No, it's not. I'm pretty sure that's him. I'm pretty sure it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. It's like a really bad Bugs Bunny Daffy Duck cartoon all of a sudden. Who is he? And this man says, it's me. It's really me. I'm the man. You can tell everybody, I'm the man, I'm the man, I'm the man. Some of you got the hip-hop reference, some did not. Right? And all of a sudden, some people kept saying, no, I don't think it's you. Did you have a twin? Because I know this guy, look, maybe it's a cousin. It looks like you. And the guy says, no, it's me. I can see that, celebrate this thing. And all of a sudden, they want to know why, how, what, and where. Why, how, what, and where. All the questions. Verse 10. How then were your eyes opened? Now, I don't know how they asked that. I'm figuring sarcasm, knowing human nature and how I would probably ask that question, and knowing some of you and how you would ask it, it's probably then, how then were your eyes opened? Right? Young man says, who cares? I don't care. I can see. Let's celebrate. Let's have a party. All you want to know is why, where, what, and how. This is a big deal for me. Can't you see? I can see. I was blind. Now I can see. Can't we celebrate this? And all you want are explanations. Why can't we just not worry and be happy about this thing? And it continues on. Verse 11, he tells them, the man they called Jesus made some mud, put it in my eyes, and now they're rolling their eyes, right? Yeah, I made mud, put it in your eyes. That's the goofiest thing I've ever heard. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and I washed, and then I could see. But who cares about how? This man, who cares? I can see. Verse 12, they're not done yet. Where is this man? They asked him. And his reply, I love this reply, I don't know. See, that's the catchphrase that we're going to see through this whole story. I don't know. He doesn't know. I don't know. Think about it. He's never seen Jesus, has he? He's heard his voice. Jesus told him to go wash. Jesus went on his way. This guy has never seen him. I don't know. This guy's got to be frustrated. I can see. Isn't anybody happy about this besides me? I was a blind beggar, and now my life has been radically changed. I can see where, why, what, how. All you want are questions. Let's have a party. Somebody go get some baklava. Let's have a party over this thing. And they're asking questions. And you think it would be done there, but now it starts all over again. Verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees. Now this is where we cue the Star Wars Darth Vader music. Dun, 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 the Pharisees. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. A Sabbath. Jesus, what is wrong with you? You don't do this on the Sabbath. What's wrong with you? Have you no respect for the rules, laws, and decrees that we put down? Everybody knows you don't do work on the Sabbath. So this can't be from God, because we know what God would do, could do, wouldn't do, shouldn't do. And God doesn't work on the Sabbath. I know this is another weird belief they had back then. Couldn't even heal a blind man on the Sabbath, because everyone knows, Jesus, everyone knows that even God doesn't work on the Sabbath. So this can't be from God. Verse 15. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. This is the man's reply. He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. So now the poor guy has to explain it all over again. And he's probably standing there or sitting there saying, can't anybody be happy for me? I can see. I was blind, now I can see. Verse 16. Some of the Pharisees said, this man, speaking about Jesus, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they were divided. See, this guy Jesus, we know, right? The Pharisees are saying, we know he's not from God because we know about God. We know how God acts, how God doesn't act. Matter of fact, if you don't know, we know God. We're religious leaders. We've studied this stuff, and God's in this box right here, and God wouldn't do anything outside of this box. And God doesn't work on the Sabbath. We don't work on the Sabbath. We know God rests, so we're supposed to rest. And so this is God, and he's inside this box. We know how he acts, when he would act, when he wouldn't act, what he does, what he doesn't do. And he's inside. You want to see him? There he is. Don't get too close. Because God's a mystery. He's mysterious, and you really can't know him. We can know him because we're the religious leaders, and we've studied. But you don't get to know God. And God's in here, and God would not do anything that's outside of this box, and that includes working on the Sabbath. So we know this Jesus fella cannot be from God because that's something that's outside of that box. He would not do a miracle on the Sabbath because miracles aren't supposed to be done on the Sabbath because God wouldn't do that. So this can't be from God. Doesn't make any sense to us. We can't explain it, so it must not be God. And all of a sudden, you have this narrow-minded belief that God can only do certain things inside of this box, and outside of that, he can't do anything else. And since we can't explain it, and we can't understand it, it must not be God. But yet at the same time, some of them said, sinners don't do this. A sinner can't perform a sign like that, can't do a miracle like that. So they're divided. And all along, the young man standing there, he says, I don't care. I can see. Isn't anybody going to be happy about this? I can see. Story goes on. Verse 17. So they're trying to figure this out. They're divided. It can't be from God because we know how God acts, and God wouldn't do this on the Sabbath. And others said, yeah, but this can't happen outside of God, so what do we do? So they turn again, verse 17, they turn again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. And the man replied, he is a prophet. So the Pharisees saying, hey, we can't decide. Let's ask this guy again. What do you think? So the man standing there is all confused. I don't know exactly how he said he's a prophet. But he's in front of the religious leaders. I'm going to make an assumption. This is my assumption. That he looked at him and said, he's a prophet? Not a out-and-out declaration, but he's a prophet. I can't explain it, but it's undeniable. I can see. And why are you guys so hung up on this explanation? Can't we focus on what is undeniably true, this event that's happened to me? I can see, and you want these explanations. So verse 18, the story goes on. They're still not satisfied. They, the Pharisees, still do not believe that he had been blind. So now they're questioning his integrity. Now, you weren't really blind. You were faking. Because I guess he wanted to be a blind beggar along the side of the road all of his life. I don't know. And had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Since they can't explain it, they can't understand it, let's get his parents in here. Let's get them in here because, maybe this guy's lying to us. Maybe all these years he hasn't really been blind and, he was just standing along the side of the road with a sign. We get that, right? And we understand it in today's culture. Sometimes we see that and we wonder. So verse 19, the Pharisees asked the question, is this your son? Is this the one you say, that just drips with, right? Is this the one you say was born blind? That's how I interpret that. How is it that he can now see? So they call the parents in, try to ask some questions, trying to figure this out. Tell us what happened. Is he, you say he was blind. Was he really blind or was he not? Verse 20. Here's how the parents answer. We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now or who opened his eyes, I don't know. There's that catchphrase again. We don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself. And it's like, Pharisee, guys, I don't know why. We don't know. I don't know. Quite frankly, we don't care. Our son was blind, and now he can see. Don't you know what that means for us? He can go get a job. He doesn't have to live in the basement anymore. This is a big deal for us, too. And now why are you interrogating us? He's of age. He's an adult. You go ask him. Now, here's an explanation in verse 22 why they responded that way. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he's of age, ask him. His parents realized that there was something undeniably true that happened to their son. Their son that was born blind can now see. But if they acknowledge that Jesus is the Messiah, they're in trouble. They get excommunicated, and it's a little different, right? In today's modern day America, if you get kicked out of one church, there's all kinds of other churches you can go to. In their culture, in their society, if they get excommunicated, if they get kicked out of the synagogue, that means they would lose their culture, potentially lose their family, definitely lose their friends, maybe lose their jobs, maybe their home, their whole way of living, their finances, everything is destroyed. And not only that, they wouldn't be able to sacrifice in the temple for the forgiveness of their sins. This was a big deal. They know something's undeniably true, but they bail. They bail on their son. I don't know. Go ask him. He's an adult. So what did the Pharisees do? Verse 24. They go, ask the guy. Second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. And here's what they say to him. Give glory to God by telling the truth. Well, that's what we want. We want the truth. Give glory to God by telling the truth. We know this man is a sinner. What kind of set-up question is that? In today's world, we call that a good old-fashioned perjury trap right there. We want you to tell the truth. We know this guy's a sinner, but tell us the truth. What happened? Go ahead. Because, by the way, remember, we have God right here. We know how God should act, would act, could act. So you tell us the truth, what really happened. It'll be good. We'll go on our merry way. And, by the way, we know this guy's a sinner. So before you answer, go ahead and answer. All we need is for you to say the same thing. This came from God. It wasn't that guy, and he's a sinner, and we'll call it a day. Here's what the guy replied in verse 25. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. I don't know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see. I don't know. I don't know if this guy's really from God. I don't know if he's a sinner. I'll let you guys figure it out. But what I do know is once I was blind and now I see. And that's my story. And I'm sticking to it, fellas. Story goes on in verse 26. Then they ask him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? What? Where? How? Why? You can't embrace this. They can't embrace this until they get it explained, until they fully understand it, even though they can look at this man and know it's undeniably true. How did this answer? How did this happen? And so he answers, I've told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Now, I don't know the tone of that one. I don't know if that was a tone of disdain. Do you want to be his disciples too? I don't know if it was sarcasm. I don't know. Maybe it was his aha moment, and now he understood. Oh, they're asking these questions because they want to be his disciples too. But apparently the way he said it or how he said it or the fact that he said it was not a good thing, because in verse 28, here's their reaction. They hurled insults at him. They insulted him. Said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses, because we know that God spoke to Moses. But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. And all of a sudden, this man comes to a realization about his life, that the Pharisees and the religious leaders were nicer to him when they ignored him when he was sitting along the side of the road as a blind beggar than they are now when Jesus miraculously healed his blindness. Wow. Pharisees' conclusion, because here's the Pharisees' conclusion about what's going on. Since we don't know and we can't explain, it must not be true. Even though standing in front of them was the undeniable truth that this was a man that was born blind and can now see. So the man decides to answer. I mean, I don't know how you react, but oftentimes when insults are hurled at me, I'm pretty good with words, and I can, bring it back. We'll go. It's go time. I go. I mean, it's not the most Jesus-like thing. I get it. But if we want to go, we'll go. I can use words. I'm not going to, physically fight anybody anymore, but with words, I'm pretty good. Here's what the man says in verse 30 through 34. Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you are steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. So here's this guy, and this blind man says, even I know that this kind of thing comes from God. The Pharisees said, oh yeah, you're right, now we believe. No, that's not what happens. They threw him out, excommunicated him. He's no longer part of the community, and they throw him out. And then a really interesting thing happens. There's no celebration for this guy, no party, no baklava on a tray. Verse 35, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. So Jesus hears this. He hears that they threw him out, and when he found him, so Jesus went looking for this guy. He just got excommunicated, got thrown out of his culture, thrown out of his society, even though this miraculous thing that God had just done for him. So Jesus goes and finds him, he says to this man, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. All of a sudden, this man, he needs no explanation. No more explanation is needed. I was blind, now I see. You don't need to point it out to me. All I need for you is to point to who that man is. Tell me who the Son of Man is, and I will believe, no questions asked, because I don't understand how he did it. Now, keep in mind, he's the first time he's seeing Jesus. He's never physically seen him. Point him out to me. I don't need any more explanation. That's undeniably true to me. Verse 37, Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Lord, I believe, and it says that he immediately worshiped him. No more explanation was needed. So let me ask you a question. Do you have any doubts about God? You don't have to raise your hand, nod your head, or anything, smile, or do anything. I just was kind of curious whether you have any doubts about God. Would it surprise you if I said that I have some doubts? I have some big ones. I have some little ones. I'm just like you. I have some doubts. There's some things I need to understand. I just don't understand why God does certain things or doesn't do certain things. And when that happens, when that doubt happens, it becomes like this, that all of a sudden, if I can do that, Drew, you did so good, and I really stink at this. Because what happens, let me turn this so everybody can see it. Can everybody get a look at that? Is what happens when we have those doubts, there's these missing pieces of the puzzle. And when we have those doubts, our tendency is that I'm trying to figure out, God, what you're doing, and I don't understand. And what happens, we get right up in here, and we get right on focus, right on that missing piece, and all of a sudden our focus is there. And there's things I don't understand that I want answers for, God. And when you focus there, you lose sight of the big picture. I mean, I need to understand something, God, and I'm focused right here, and all I see is that white spot because I need to understand about my grandma Fout. My grandma Fout loved Jesus, taught Bible class in her church, was one of the most generous people I've ever met. A large reason why I'm standing here today was the influence of my grandma Fout. I sat right next to her in that part of the church, not this church we went to, on that section, sat next to her when I gave my life to Jesus Christ. Huge influence. What I don't understand, God, is how in her old age could her body be ravaged by Parkinson's and dementia. I don't understand. This is unexplainable to me. And if I'm focused solely on there, I lose sight of so much other that God has going on. And I don't get it. You know, another thing I don't get, and God, I want answers for because I have some doubts. I don't get it. It's unexplainable to me. I wear this. Some of you have seen this. It says Brock Strong. Brock Strong Foundation. I'm on the board of Brock Strong Foundation, named after a young man that died at the age of 14. And I don't get it. Because I've known this young man from the time he was born. And I focus here, I don't get what's going on because he was one of the most giving, the greatest kid, maybe the greatest human being I've ever met in my life. He loved Jesus. He loved people. He loved the church. one of the most giving young men. Every time you saw him, he had a smile on his face. And I don't get from when he was 5 days old until he died at the age of 14, how he was in and out of hospitals, spent more time at Nationwide Children's Hospital than he did in his school in some years, and down in Cincinnati, and several times to NIH and Bethesda with this autoimmune disease that no one could say what it is or how it was happening. Great kid, giving kid, straight A student, loved people, loved God, carried out the great commandment, great commission like nobody else I've ever met. And this young man dies at 14. At a celebration of life service, somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 people came to that boy's celebration of life. That's the impact he had. And I don't get it, because when I focus here, I say, God, I don't get it. How do you let a good kid like that, and when there's so many other scummy people, and they get a skate? I don't get that. And the problem is, if we stay focused on these missing pieces, on the things that are unexplainable, that's where we'll stay. But if we step back and take a look, you all know exactly what that picture is, even with the missing pieces. It's undeniably true that that's the picture of Da Vinci's last summer. Well, they had that in summer. Last Supper. Right? That's exactly what it is. And when we get so hung up on that, we start to miss the things that are undeniably true because we're so focused on the things that are unexplainable. We're so focused on the doubts that we have that we miss out on the things that we know are 100% true. And here's the thing. Doubt enters into our life. Doubt enters when you focus on the unexplainable. I have doubts, you have doubts, but that doubt grows and creates issues in our spiritual life when we're only focused on the things that are unexplainable. But check this out. Faith grows when you focus on the undeniable. Undeniably true that God loves you, loves me, wants the best for us, and sometimes I don't get it. It's unexplainable to me. The best, at least the best that we think, doesn't happen. And here's why it doesn't happen, because we know how God would act. We have our box too. Let's face it, we do. God wouldn't do that. That's not the way God acts. I know how God acts. Now, our box might be bigger than what the Pharisees' box is. God wouldn't do that. Or we say, that's not the way I would do it if I were God. And then all of a sudden, doubt starts to creep in, even though we know that this is undeniable true. And there's some undeniable truths that we just need to grab a hold of. It is undeniably true that God is the creator. It's the only one that makes sense. Either God was the creator or just kind of randomly in space, a couple of things ran into each other, and billions of years later, here we are. It doesn't make much sense. The only thing that makes sense is that God is the creator. It's undeniably true. It's undeniably true that Jesus came and walked on this earth. History speaks about it, tells about it. It's undeniably true that he walked on this earth. He came here, sent by God, to teach us about who God is. Undeniably true that he died on a cross, buried, 3 days later resurrected, and ascended to be with God in heaven. Undeniably true. It's undeniably true that people believed that back then and people believe it today. And the people back then that believed that, they found that their life was radically changed from the inside out. And the people even today that accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior will say, I was changed from the inside out, and my life was radically changed. Once I was this way, and now I'm this way. Undeniably true. So here's the question and the title of this message today. What's your story? What's your story? See, the guy in John chapter 9, his story is, I don't know. All I know is once I was blind, now I see. Jesus did it, and I believe, because my life is radically changed. What's your story? What's your story? You say, once before Jesus, I lived my life this way, and Jesus came into my life. I was radically changed. Now I live my life this way. What's your story? I'm going to give you all a homework assignment. You ready for your homework? Over this next week, think about that question. What's your story? Write that story down so you can tell that story in 30 seconds. The blind man in this story can tell it in 5. All I know is once I was blind, now I see. Jesus believe it, did it, I believe. 5 seconds. So what's your story? Homework this week. Think about it, write it down, condense it so that you can get it and that you can tell it in 30 seconds, because here's why. That's why this is important. We live in a world where people are thirsting. They're thirsting for things with a thirst that cannot be quenched by anything that this world has to offer. And it's your story about how Jesus changed your life could quench that thirst for them by introducing them to Jesus. That's why that story is important. Your story is important. Because you might just be that one person that I'll never be able to talk to. You might never, ever be able to get them into a church building. But your story, once I was this way, now I'm this way. I can't explain it, but it's undeniably true. You've seen it in my life. It was Jesus, and he can do it for you too. So what happens when you tell your story of faith? When you tell your story of faith, things start to happen. You start to see God in whole new ways. And all of a sudden, those pieces of the puzzle that were missing, all of a sudden, they start to, I guess it goes this way. Sometimes it takes time to figure out how these pieces go in. And all of a sudden, those great mysteries you have, as you start to see through spiritual eyes, that picture becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. You might not even still be able to explain it, but you know that it's still undeniably true that God has a plan and a place for you. And all of a sudden, through spiritual eyes, you get to see that. What was once a mystery will no longer be a mystery. And here's the final point. You don't have to understand everything to have faith in Jesus Christ. You don't. Some things are undeniably true, and that's all you need to hold on to. The things that are unexplainable, they'll be explained someday. As time goes on, maybe you'll get that. So here we are today, this bright light of truth that Jesus brought into this situation. The blind man believed it. The Pharisees, they rejected it. And here we are today at a crossroads. Are we going to believe this or not? Are we going to continue to focus on these things that I cannot explain and get so focused that doubt gets into my life? Or are we going to focus on the big picture? Are we going to continue to say, I don't understand this. Why, what, how, where? Why, what, how, where? It's unexplainable, so I'm not going to believe it. Or are we going to say, that's undeniably true, and because it's undeniably true, I am going to believe it. And we're at that crossroads today. When you shift your focus from the unexplainable to the things that are undeniably true, you'll find that you'll come face to